Please join me in welcoming Graeme Scott. Graeme, thank you. So excited to have you back on the Tuesday call.
Yeah, thanks, Cass. Excited to be here. And as I was mentioning when people were jumping on here, it was so great to see so many of you in Dallas last week for our partner summit, a hugely successful event. And we're glad that so many of you were able to join us. Now, we do have a last minute pivot here on the topic. So we had lined up, and as Cass said, I was prepared to talk a lot about devices in the workplace. And I will be using that topic for another date, but we had a cancellation of some folks that were going to join me. Unfortunately, they couldn't make. So I had to do a last minute pivot here, and I decided to go with a topic that I have a lot of conversations around with advisors. I had several of those conversations last week at the summit. And so I wanted to kind of bring this to the audience as a whole and just talk through what is going on here. So Chandler, if you want to move to the next slide here, our title slide. Today's topic is called 10, 50, 150, and 1000. Now, if you guys played that in the Powerball this week, I'm sorry to inform you, those were not the winning numbers. What those are is four numbers that I think every technology advisor should have somewhere in the back of their mind when they're talking to a customer. Because one of the things we know about business is that growth doesn't happen smoothly. Companies simply get a little bigger every year and keep operating largely the same way. They can't do that, right? They hit points where something that worked yesterday suddenly doesn't work anymore. For example, the Wi-Fi that was fine for 8 people is no longer good for 40. The owner who knew every employee personally suddenly has people working for the company they don't know or they've never met. The single internet connection becomes 3 offices. The handful of SaaS applications becomes 40. 10 cell phones become 300. And eventually, you get to an organization with multiple offices, multiple clouds, multiple carriers, multiple business units, and sometimes nobody is entirely sure who owns what anymore. Those transitions are where opportunity lives for advisors. So today, when I talk about 10, 50, 150, and 1000, we're going to look at what happens to the technology conversation as customers grow through those numbers. So let's go to our next slide here, Chandler. This is really the foundation for everything we're going to talk about here today. There's some fascinating research at a Harvard Business School, which really kind of got this whole thing going. And it was recently published in the Harvard Business Review that looked at fast growing companies and what happens to decision making as those companies scale. And here's what's interesting. They don't simply say customer companies get more complicated as they get bigger, which is generally how we tend to think. They identify actual organizational fault lines. So somewhere around 50 employees, founders begin losing the ability to maintain meaningful relationships with everyone in the organization. Around 80, most companies begin needing more formal organizational structure. And then we get to 150. So 150 is what's called Dunbar's number. And Dunbar is Robin Dunbar. Research suggests that there's a cognitive limit, roughly 150 people, to the number of stable social relations a person can effectively maintain. And Harvard's point is that as an organization approaches that kind of scale, you simply cannot run the business through personal relationships anymore. So think about that. At 10 people, I can walk across the office and ask someone what's happening with XYZ account. At 30 people, I probably still know who's doing that. At 50, that starts to get a lot harder. At 150, well, now I need systems, I need processes, I need policies, I need management structures, I need controls. And this is where I think it gets really interesting for us as advisors, because what enables all those things? Technology, right? Identity management, device management, security policy, network architecture, cloud governance, collaboration, customer experience, mobility data, all of these things that we talk about and sell on a regular basis are part of this conversation and enable this transition. So this isn't like a sales framework that we just kind of made up on a whiteboard. There's real organizational research underneath it, and that's what we're going to talk about here today. So what we're going to do is take this research and ask, if the organization changes as it grows, shouldn't the technology conversation change with it? And so today's thesis, if you will, is that the best advisors aren't just having conversations that their customers need today. They're already starting that conversation the customer is going to need next. And obviously, we're going to take this from a network and mobility slant. That's going to be kind of primary our focus because, of course, that's my bag. But I am going to talk about security, CX, and cloud as well, because those are all very important components of the technology stack. So Chandler, next slide, if you will. So this is the growth curve. I've basically broken the customer journey into roughly 5 stages, okay? Startup, growth, established SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. And again, I don't want you to totally obsess about the numbers here. You know, should somebody with 247 employees belong in one box and someone with 251 in another? It's not really the point. We want to really kind of think of these as lanes, right? Or warning lights. The point is that complexity compounds as companies grow. More employees means more endpoints means more applications means more data, more locations means more connectivity means more dependencies, etc., etc. More dependencies, more technology means more things that can fail. And the financial stakes start changing too, right? Because there's a final consequence to this complexity. ITIC's 2025 research found that 93% of mid-sized and large enterprises surveyed said that an hour of server downtime can cost 300,000 or more. And 46% put that number at above a million. So basically saying when technology fails, it's a major problem for the organization. Now, obviously, that actual number is going to vary dramatically based on the customer you've got. A hospital is a lot different than a pizza shop. A manufacturer is a lot different than a law firm. But the point is that as customers move to the right of this slide, as they grow, technology failure or technology mismatch increasingly becomes a business problem. And as advisors, our job changes along with those phases and what we deliver. So let's go ahead and break these stages out, jump into this growth curve here a little bit. Next slide, if you will, please, Chandler. So let's start with the startup, okay? This is 1 to 10 employees, right? Kind of typically you've got a founder who's running IT as well as running sales, is running everything else. He's running IT off a laptop and probably whatever router he got from the cable company or from 5G. And he's doing it between sales calls, right? He's running sales, he's running operations. They're doing all these things. At 5 employees, that can actually work. But that's what makes this stage really dangerous because almost everything works until it doesn't. Everybody knows the Wi-Fi password. Everybody has access to Dropbox. The owner buys the phones. Someone creates the Microsoft account. Passwords are being shared somewhere. And if somebody leaves, hey, did anybody remember to turn off Bubba's access? But nobody knows, right? This customer doesn't need a digital transformation framework. What they need is good fundamentals, right? Reliable connectivity, good Wi-Fi. You need to start talking about things like basic security, MFA, backup, perhaps a sensible cloud environment, depending on the business. Basic device oversight, you know, maybe mobile device management is too big for what they're doing right now, but you know, as they grow, these are the kind of conversations we have, right? The opportunity for the advisor here isn't complexity, it's building a good foundation because the reality is this is the cheapest point in the customer's journey to get things right. Expenses or mistakes cost the least amount at this stage. Here's a statistic that really kind of drives easy for me to say, that really kind of drives this home is Verizon had a study in 2025 data breach investigations report found that ransomware was involved in 88% of SMB breaches compared with 39% of breaches at larger organizations. So what does that tell us? That tells us that small doesn't mean invisible. Quite often it means underdefended, right? And Verizon found something else interesting that ransomware appeared in 44% of all breaches. That's up from 32% last year. So planting basic network and security hygiene at this stage isn't over engineering, it's good business. And your role as an advisor here is to assist as an implementer, right? Help them get those fundamentals right. But at this stage, you really want to build these fundamentals with the expectation that the company may become 20 people, then 50, then 100. Because ripping everything out later is much harder to do than making one good decision at the beginning. And I know that's challenging when every dollar counts at that startup level. Every dime you spend is a dime that comes out of your pocket. But it is important to at least have those conversations and lay the groundwork. So, next phase, let's take a look at this. This is what I'm going to call, Chandler, if you want to swap the slide for me. We're going to call this the growth phase. So this is kind of where we've crossed 10 employees. We're in that sort of 10 to 50 range. And this is where things really do start getting interesting, because what worked when everybody could sit around one table and have conversations starts getting harder. All of a sudden, new employees start showing up on Monday morning, and does anybody have a laptop for them? Did somebody create the email account? What applications do they need? Who gives them access? And what happens to that access if they leave, right? Maybe sales has put together a CRM. Marketing just signed up for some cool new application that they need. Someone has a personal Dropbox account with customer information on it, and someone just put ChatGPT on their corporate credit card, right? Welcome to growth. This is what happens. Gartner has been tracking this decentralization of technology for years. In 2022, they said 41% of employees were already performing some form of technology work. And Gartner projected that by 2027, 75% of employees would acquire, modify, or create technology outside of IT's visibility. And of course, that's even assuming you have an IT department, right? Maybe it's just the founder who's still doing that. So think about what that means for this customer. The technology estate isn't being built exclusively by IT or the founder anymore, right? The employees are building it. That's why somewhere between 10 and 50 employees, you need to start talking about things like endpoint management, identity, SaaS governance, right? Managed Wi-Fi, security policies, CX tools, mobility. And I would absolutely start talking about mobile devices here. Who owns them? Who pays for them? How are they provisioned, right? What happens when somebody leaves? Because 12 phones can be managed on a spreadsheet, but 60 phones become somebody's job, right? That's a lot. And again, this is where the advisor role changes, because you're not just helping them implement stuff anymore. You're becoming more of a guide, right? You're starting to say, hey, you're fine today, but if you're planning to hire another 20 people this year, here's what we're going to want to have in place before you do that. That sentence is advisory, right? And as they approach 50 employees, remember what starts happening organizationally. The founder can't see everything anymore. So technology starts replacing visibility with governance, and that is a key for growth. So now let's take a look at the next phase. Chandler, if you want to swap the slide there for me, this is what we call established SMB. So now we've crossed that 50 level, right? And this is really the sweet spot for a lot of advisors. A lot of you guys live, eat, and breathe here and love this area of growth, right? This is because this is where technology really starts becoming architecture. Maybe the customer opens another location or two. Maybe they acquire another company. Half the workforce is all of a sudden remote. They've got employees in other states, right? And suddenly that single site network that was perfectly adequate isn't adequate anymore. We're talking about things like redundancy. We're talking about things like SD-WAN. We're talking about cellular failover. We're talking about consistent security policies across locations. We're talking about unified endpoint management. We're talking about cloud applications that those employees have accumulated over the last 5 or 6 years as they've grown, right? We're talking about a customer experience that may be completely different depending on which office a customer visits. This is where I want advisors to stop looking at technologies individually, right? We really got to look at the aggregate. Don't look at the circuit. Look at the data journey. This is something that Chad and I have talked about a lot. Sam also talks about this in her presentations. Where are the users? Where are the applications? Where is the data? How does it move between those locations? How critical is it? What happens when that path fails? So that conversation has changed to that from when does your Comcast circuit expire, right? That's a big shift in conversation. And here's another interesting dynamic. This is from a company called Capterra, that's a research firm. They found that 57% of SMBs surveyed had experienced high impact shadow IT occurring outside the IT department's visibility. And although the term shadow IT sounds nefarious, it's really just people trying to get their job done, right? And it's a natural consequence of growth. Again, as we talked about earlier, marketing's now bought something, finance has bought something, sales has bought something, operations is connecting something. And eventually, all those individual decisions by different departments becomes an architecture, whether it's planned or not, right? And here's another data point I like. This is from a company called Asana, and they did an anatomy of work project. Knowledge workers reported spending roughly 60% of their time on work about work, essentially communicating, coordinating, searching for information, and dealing with processes around the actual work. So that's a great illustration of what this complexity can do to an organization. The company has resources, way more resources than it had at 20 employees, yet people are spending more time coordinating those resources. And remember our Harvard study we cited at the beginning, we're now moving toward that 150 number, right? What they call Dunbar's number. We're approaching the point where personal relationships alone simply cannot hold an organization together. Formal systems aren't optional anymore, which means that this is exactly where we as advisors have to move from individual products to architecture. Don't just look at the circuit. Again, look at that data journey. Where are the users? Where are the applications? Where's the data? How does it move? And that's a very different conversation. So don't wait for the second location to ask that. The key is to be proactive. Be that strategic partner. Don't wait for the second location. Talk about SD-WAN today before they need it. Talk about cybersecurity today before they need it. Don't wait for 200 mobile devices to talk about MDM. Talk about it when they're at 50 with plans for growth. That is the key. Have that next conversation early and position yourself as a strategic advisor, a strategic asset for that company. So let's move to the next one here, what we call mid-market, right? And this is when something interesting happens. The customer all of a sudden has a lot of resources. They have an IT department. They have IT people. They may even have a CIO. They've got security people potentially, right? They've got procurement. So some of you guys may think, okay, well, they need me as an advisor less. And the key truth is that they really just need you differently because their biggest problem isn't necessarily a lack of resources anymore. It's fragmentation, right? We think about what happened during our last stage. Marketing has its stack. Sales has its stack. Operations has its stack. Every office has another stack. Maybe somewhere along the line, someone acquired a company and they're still running on a completely different network. You've got IoT devices that all of a sudden jumped into the mix here. Nobody's got them inventoried. You've got mobile devices spread across all sorts of different carriers. You've got SaaS everywhere, right? All these applications. And increasingly, you've got AI tools now, of course, complicating everything. Flexera did a 2026 State of the Cloud survey and found that 73% of organizations now operate hybrid cloud environments. And that creates complexity, right? PwC research found that 75% of executives were concerned that unnecessary organizational complexity creates cyber and privacy risks. So again, at this stage, this fragmentation, all of this stuff that's going on is creating risk, is creating challenges for the organization. So your value as an advisor isn't necessarily knowing Cisco better than their network engineer or Microsoft better than their cloud architect. It's being able to see across the silos, right? And I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything here that is, revolutionary. But if you've got a 500 employee customer and you've never had a cybersecurity conversation with them, or you've never had a network security conversation with them, you're late. Right? If you've never talked about network resiliency, you're late. If you haven't talked about mobility, you're late. Cloud governance, you're late. And increasingly, if you haven't asked about AI, you're late. because someone is going to have those conversations, right? You want it to be you. Your role here becomes somewhat of an orchestrator, right? You don't have to personally solve all these problems for them anymore. You have to recognize the problem, help them recognize the problem, and figure out who are the best people to put in the room to solve it. And that is an incredibly valuable position for organizations. So, let's look at our last stage here, what we call enterprise. And enterprise, of course, a lot of different people define this in different ways. For our purpose, we're going to define it as 1,000 plus. This is the enterprise. And at this point, usually when you're an enterprise, they've got resources everywhere, right? They've got all kinds of resources. That's not the problem. The problem is getting all those resources moving in the same direction, right? They've got multiple business units. Maybe they have multiple countries. They've got multiple carriers. They've got multiple clouds, security platforms, mobility programs, maybe 5 different vendors solving essentially the same problem, right? If we remember how we got here, all these different departments are building their own stacks. And now we've got an organization that's got all kinds of things all over the place. Enterprise IT is often less about adding another piece of technology and more about orchestrating complexity. And there's a real cost to that complexity for these organizations, right? McKinsey looked at decision making inside large organizations and estimated that ineffective decision making can consume more than 530,000 days of managers' time every year at a typical Fortune 500 company. Now, that is an unbelievably mind-boggling number, and that they calculate that at roughly $250 million in wasted labor costs. So you think about that. That's $250 million, not because the company doesn't have enough people, because they have so many people, processes, systems, and decisions that coordinating everything becomes extraordinarily difficult. And that brings us right back to where we started, right? Harvard's research describes what happens when founder-led, relationship-based decision-making stops scaling. At the enterprise, we're seeing the opposite end of that continuum. The organization now has plenty of structure. The organization has complexity within that structure. That's the problem. And that's where a great advisor can become incredibly valuable. You're no longer saying, hey, I can save you $80 on that circuit. You're saying you've got 200 locations, 6 carriers, you've acquired 3 companies, and no consistent failover strategy. Let's simplify that. Or your mobile contracts are spread across 3 regions. Let's rationalize them. Or you've got IoT deployments happening independently across 5 different business units. Let's create some visibility. Or this is a real popular one right now, right? Your AI strategy is moving workloads into cloud and edge environments your network wasn't designed around. Let's take a look at that architecture. So here you become, more of a navigator. Your value is not knowing more about every technology than everybody inside that enterprise. You won't. Your value, again, is being able to see across those silos and help them address that complexity within the organization. So let's move to our next slide here. We're going to zoom back out, okay? Look at what happened to our role as an advisor, okay? At the startup stage, you were an implementer, right? Let me help you get this right. Let me help do this for you. Let me take some of this off your plate. I'm going to take this on. Then we move to growth, where we're kind of more of a guide, right? Here's what you're going to need next. As you grow your organization, these are the things you need to start thinking about, business owners. This is what's happening. At established SMB, now all of a sudden we're kind of more of a strategic partner, right? Let's make sure that technology supports where the business is going. At mid-market, we're coming in and we're helping out as more of an orchestrator, right? There's a lot of moving pieces here. Let's help connect them. And then at the enterprise resources, you are a sort of a navigator, right? You've got resources. Let me help you simplify this complexity, right? Notice something here. As the customer got bigger, so did their IT department, so did their resources. And the advisor's role didn't become less relevant, but the job changed slightly, right? We moved from doing to guiding to anticipating to orchestrating. And I think that's the real opportunity for us as TAs. And again, this is a conversation I have all the time with advisors. The best advisors aren't just having the conversation their customer needs today, they're already starting the conversation their customer is going to need next. So, next slide here as we wrap this up. What do you do tomorrow morning? What do you do with this information, right? I want you to do something really simple. Pick 5 or 10 of your customers, right? Don't pick your biggest. Pick customers you know reasonably well and put them somewhere on this curve. Then ask 3 questions. First, where are they really in this curve? Not just employee count, but like operationally, okay? Are they still behaving like a 20-person company, even though they've got well over 100 employees? There's opportunity there, right? Second, start thinking about what starts breaking next for these customers, right? Where are you going to start to see cracks? Is it in connectivity? Is it in security? Is it in mobility? Is it in cloud, CX, IoT? Whatever it is, start trying to identify where those opportunities may start to emerge within your customer base. And then this is the most important question. What conversation am I not having yet that I should be? Because if you can identify the problem 6 months before your customer identifies it themselves, or better yet, starts feeling the pain of it, you are no longer the person they call when they need a quote. You're the person they call when they're trying to figure out what to do. And that is where ideally we want to be. So remember those numbers, right? 10, 50, 150, 1,000. At 10, informality starts getting harder. 50, founder visibility starts breaking down. 150, that Dunbar number, right? Relationships alone can no longer run the organization. And then at 1,000, complexity and fragmentation become the problem. So don't wait for your customers to cross that line. Start the conversation before they get there. All right, so there you go. That is my, what's my book name? That is my hit there. Why don't we go ahead and see if we can open that up to any questions? Did we have any in the chat here? Let's go to Q&A. Cass, you want to come back in?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm waiting right now to see if we've got any questions that have kind of come in, which have quite a bit of conversation that's been in here today.
That's good. Yeah. So again, yeah, major issue. I think Eric, you raise a good point, right? Shadow IT is, and again, the shadow IT is such a nefarious sounding term, right? It's like we've got this shadow organization. It's really just employees trying to do their job. And I think we want to just give them the structure to do that within the organizational confines. I mean, even an organization like Telarus, we have these conversations all the time about shadow IT. How do we, these tools that we know are out there that are popular, how do we implement them into what we're doing in our daily business? So, all right.
Yeah, and I also see a lot of folks in the call are asking about this deck. The actual recording of this, if you want to screenshot anything that you might have missed, is going to be available on Telarus University. It's under the forums tab. I will share a link to that momentarily, but that way you guys can go back, screenshot what parts you want, and then that way you'll be able to see that information and be able to kind of create whatever you need in order to get that to your customers as well.
Yeah, a question here from James. What's the difference between shadow IT and shadow AI? I mean, I think obviously AI is kind of an extension of shadow IT, right? And shadow IT is essentially going out there, getting applications, doing things within the organization that are not sort of approved in a general organizational sense. Shadow AI would be implementing AI solutions as part of that, right? Bringing in like putting company data into things like ChatGPT or Claude, right? These are major problems that organizations are coming to. So, AI is driving a lot of this conversation, right? Especially as organizations start to get bigger, because we know that their employees are using these tools, right? They are so readily used. The question is, what information are they putting into these tools that is proprietary data, that is organizational data, right? That's what organizations and companies don't always know. And that is one of the big concerns.